Hello and welcome, Dr. DeCesaris.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Where are you coming in from today?
I am currently in Arizona. I live in Phoenix. So yeah,
Nice.
spend the
Nice.
summer in Colorado with my family, but now that it's cooling off here in Arizona, it's entering the most beautiful months of the year.
Yeah, wonderful. Have you been there for long?
I've been here since 2018, so about 5 years. Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. So the work that you're doing in functional medicine is really exciting, and I think that there is a lot for you to share with our audience today. I'll start by saying, I speak to a lot of people and they're kind of different levels of involvement with the menstrual cycle and with our hormonal cycles. Um, and that's beautiful. And we always try to connect it back. But a lot of what I've seen in terms of the work that you're putting out there in the world and the particular focuses you have, they seem really bang on aligned with some of the key components that got me into this field to begin with. So I want to start talking about biohacking and the menstrual cycle, because that is an area very near and dear to my heart. So yeah, how do you consider the menstrual cycle in an approach to biohacking?
Yeah, and I love that you love this topic too, because it's literally one of, I think, like, the most fun things to talk about, to teach
Yeah.
people to experience, and really just lets women come into their body at this like whole other level that we're not even taught possible. That being said, the kind of field of biohacking, the industry, it's been very male dominated.
Hmm.
Meaning a lot of like the little bit of research that is done, a lot of the protocols that are out there, a lot of the people that are talking about it are men, and they're not always considering what's going on in a woman's body. Like really physiologically, we're four different women over the course of our menstrual cycle. So it
I
makes
hear you.
right like
I
why
love that.
doing the same thing every day when we know our hormones are changing, our ability to handle stress, our ability to tap into our
Yes.
resilience, that's also changing. So when we look at what biohacking is doing, tools that are aimed to bring our performance to the next level, to improve resilience, like we really want to think about what's going on with our menstrual cycle so that we can take advantage of different tools at different times
Yeah.
versus doing the same thing all the time. So really, I think like biohacking as it is, sometimes it doesn't really set women up for success the way I think it could,
Yeah.
if you consider our hormones a little bit more.
I a million percent align with you on this one, because and I can't believe that people don't talk about this more. I think what you said about it being a male dominated industry is significant, and why our menstrual cycles are not more in the conversation. I got really into menstrual cycle awareness through my own kind of deep dive in habits and trying to understand, or trying to, yeah, understand how to build habits and things like habit stacking and what works. And then that led me into like biohacking. And then it was through that like really intense, like putting myself under a microscope, that I saw how cyclical I am. And it was like, oh, I don't suck at my exercise routine. I just do it differently every month, but quite predictably.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, even some of the tools like sauna use or cold plunges, like there's going to be times where that feels a lot better than other times. And it's not in
Yeah.
an weakness. It's not that like women aren't trying hard enough, but like we think about something like a cold plunge, which like if we're trying to do that like right before our period starts, like really our hormone profile is not set up to like really benefit from it. Like we're already prone to high cortisol. We don't handle stress as well. Sometimes
Yeah.
one more stressor can kind of send things in the wrong direction versus, if you want a cold plunge for better resilience, like the first half of a woman's cycle, she can really benefit from that and kind of chart it out accordingly.
I love that. So let's take it down a notch and kind of drill into this. First of all, could you name some of the most like common biohacking activities as you see it, or that you would recommend? And then let's look at like where they fit into the cycle.
Yeah, I would say some of the most common ones that I think women are trying out right now or that are very easily accessible, definitely like hot and cold. So things like infrared sauna use or cold plunges, cold showers, those are a big
Mhm.
one. I think intermittent fasting is one that a lot of women are playing around
Mhm.
with. Is technically a biohack. Things like red light therapy, different like nootropics, like supplements that help support
Yep.
brain health, things that help support focus, even things like microdosing that are becoming more and more popular. I
Like the
see a lot.
mushrooms.
Yeah, I see a
Yeah.
lot of these being used by women who might not necessarily know like how to utilize them
Yeah.
on their hormones, but they're tools that women want to use and they want to benefit from.
Yeah. Let's go super simple then on the cold showers and intermittent fasting. Um,
Mm.
so how would you how would you map those onto the menstrual cycle? Which phases of the cycle do you think those would be most efficient in?
Yeah, so let's start with cold showers. And I
Okay.
know for some people, and like some of this is personality dependent, like some women are really good at just doing the same thing every day.
Mhm.
If they don't do it, they won't do it. So like
Yeah.
I see people being like, oh, I just take a cold shower at the end of my shower every day for a minute. I've been doing it forever. Okay, well, first your body does get used to that. So it's like, are you really benefiting from it? But in
Mm.
terms of cold therapies, what I'm thinking are of those like more prolonged like a 4 or 5 minute cold shower or like a 2 or 3 minute cold plunge, that
Mhm.
kind of prolonged exposure to cold where we're really trying to amp up, brain performance or recovery. So what is the intention of that with any biohacking tool, whether you're a woman or a man? I think that's a really important piece is like, what is my intention by using this tool? Am I doing it just because I think it looks cool, or am I
Mm.
doing it because I have an intention? For most people who are looking to benefit from cold plunge, it's either the brain-based benefits, like, oh, I want to see what this does for my brain, my focus, my clarity, or it's the resilience benefits. And by that, I mean, I'm purposefully putting my body through a stressor so
Mhm.
that over time it gets stronger. I can better handle stress. My body can better handle stress.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at the female menstrual cycle, in the first half of our cycle, that follicular phase right up through ovulation, maybe just a little bit into the luteal phase, this is when we're really primed to better handle stress. Our nervous system has a more of a parasympathetic quality where we can better handle more stress loads. Just in terms of our hormone profile, we can handle it a little bit better versus the second half of our cycle, kind of that late luteal phase leading up to menstruation.
Yeah.
We don't handle stress as well. We tend to be a little bit more in our sympathetic nervous system where we're kind of a little more sensitive to stress. And then we kind of get cortisol rising towards the end of it. So, really, if we're using a tool like cold therapy to kind of help with resilience, we want to utilize it when our body can really actually benefit from it, which tends to be more of that kind of first two phases. Like I said, maybe a little bit into the luteal phase. Like I
Yeah.
actually recommend my clients do cold plunges the week leading up to their period. I don't think they're going to get the benefits that they will early on. If
I love that. I love that. I absolutely love that. I'll try to stop saying that. I just love it that you're talking about this and being so clear about it. Intermittent fasting. First of all, the concept of that being a biohack is exciting to me because, it is an effective tool. I talk to people about it like all the time. Some people are pro, some people are anti, like people have these big opinions about it. And it works for some people a lot and it doesn't work for, some people are really anti. For me, it works, but again, not all the time, right? Like sometimes I don't want to do it and I try to honor that and listen to it. But I don't think it's kind of presented that way as like a tool you can use at times.
like so many other things in the health industry, I think it's been kind of co-opted into a lifestyle.
Mm,
Really,
yeah.
it was intended to be that. And like, I actually think intermittent fasting, it has such an interesting history. Like, there's a lot of cultures that have had fasting for religious purposes,
Yes.
meditative purposes for years. And like, I think I think the problem actually is when it does get adopted as a lifestyle, when people use it just to promote weight loss, then you kind of toe into this world of diet culture where it's probably not used the way it should. And it does definitely, it can support not so healthy habits. But the reason that I look at it as a biohack is like it can be a tool to help your body work better, to help you cue into hunger satiety signaling, to help give your like gut a little break from food, just like really help you realize like you don't need to be eating all the time to
Yeah.
perform either. Like I think it's important for us to be able to understand like when are we hungry, when are we full, when do we need things. And for a lot of people in the biohacking world, the benefit of intermittent fasting isn't necessarily so much weight loss, it's that mental performance.
Mhm.
Kind of get this different level of brain focus, acuity of clarity when you are incorporating more intermittent fasting into your world, especially if you're also dabbling in longer fasts.
Mhm.
But again, like women's cycles, like men are on the same 24-hour clock day after day. Like women, we are not. So like
Yeah.
having to fast different than men is really important. And there's so many amazing women out there who are teaching like just on this topic. I think of like Cynthia Thurlow, Mindy Pels, like all these incredible practitioners, but helping women understand like, again, we're a little more primed to do fasting early on in our cycle. In that second half of our cycle, our luteal phase, our premenstrual phase, like we are not primed to go without food for a long time. Our blood
Yeah.
sugar regulation isn't as good. Our hormone profile doesn't support it as much. Like we really do need more nourishment during that phase, regardless of whether you're, trying to optimize fertility or not. Like it just feels harder. And I think, again, we talked earlier about biohacking being more of a male dominated industry. Like I think a lot of women sometimes have taken it on as a personal failing if they're using something like fasting and they're really good on it for a week or two. And then all of a sudden, like it gets real hard and they're like, I'm not trying hard enough. Let me fast more. Let me cut out more. Like they're putting all of that blame on themselves when the reality is they probably just dropped into a different phase of their cycle where their body really isn't primed to benefit from it as much. And instead of worrying about fasting, they should just focus on more on like nourishing and supporting them throughout that phase of it. So especially to women who are new to intermittent fasting, I'll have them try it out in the first phase of their cycle first, just
Mhm.
to see how it feels. And ultimately kind of teaching women this rhythm with fasting. Like if you're going to do longer fasting, it happens earlier in your cycle. Like
Yeah.
later in your cycle, like really don't worry about fasting. Maybe like a circadian fasting where you're eating like
Yeah.
just sun is out. But the reality is like you can get the benefits from it. You don't have to do it every day. Like the word intermittent is there for a reason, right? Like
Yeah.
intermittent.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that that naturally speaks, kind of lends itself into the concept really of eating different foods at different times in the cycle and hunger levels that change throughout the cycle. And, like the luteal phase, which, the PMS, or I hate to even use that that term, inner autumn has such a bad rap in like this time, and then into the period too. I think people confuse those a bit, and like I have to eat chocolate, I have to eat bad, I have to eat many things. Um and I, first of all, I just throw that out the window, right? Like that doesn't really serve us well at all to behave like that. But unfortunately, it's still a very widespread concept that's out there about that part of our cycle in particular. What's interesting about what you're saying is, the two kind of biohacking things we're talking about are both in luteal phase, or let's say pre-ovulation, or just basically post-ovulation. What would you recommend for a client in that second, the luteal phase, sorry, I said luteal, but follicular is where we're talking about the biohacking. So in the luteal phase, how can we take care of ourselves then?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I do hate that this phase gets like this, oh, it's awful. It's the 2 week.
Yeah.
It's more because again, we're not shifting things to reflect what's happening. So like we have to understand, first of all, as women, like what's happening now? Like, why are we a little bit more prone to not feeling quite as good? And that's because a couple things are happening. First, the nervous system kind of switches over, like I mentioned earlier, it carries more of this sympathetic quality, meaning
Mhm.
this little more like fight or flight. We're a little more prone to not handling stress quite as well. So that's step number one. In terms of hormones, like we do have progesterone rising for parts of this, but then in that phase, ultimately our hormones start bottoming out in preparation for menstruation, and it takes our brain chemicals with it, meaning, our serotonin, all that stuff kind of all tanks. And that can leave a lot of women feeling like, I need something to make me feel better, and I don't know what that is. And you find yourself in front of the fridge, like grabbing the chocolate and grabbing anything to make you feel
Yeah.
better. But if you understand those patterns and what's happening, you know how to support yourself in other ways. So in terms of different biohacking tools, I like to think things that help nourish you, things that help recharge you, as well as things that help balance that nervous system, bring it down to a more parasympathetic quality. So I actually still like using like infrared sauna use here, but we'll keep sessions shorter. We'll keep it to like 25 minutes or less, because we know infrared sauna use for shorter periods of time, it does stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. It does help kind of give you that restful, more calming activity versus, hanging out in a sauna for an hour, which is going to be a little bit more stressful on your body, even if it feels good.
Yeah.
Some of the tools, it's just using them for a shorter duration, or like, I love red light therapy in this phase. It just helps with inflammation. It seems to like help with a sense of calm and restoration. And what women also don't realize that's happening during this phase is like your brain is actually really primed for like learning and implementing that you set in place for yourself. So I actually think this is a great phase for things like brain nootropics, things like microdosing that really help with learning and expanding neural connections. So it's just a different flow, but you can see how if you didn't understand this and you spent the second half of your cycle trying to do the cold plunge and do the intense workouts and do all the
Yeah.
long fasting and cut out carbs completely, that like
It's
really
not working for you. Yeah.
like
Yeah. It's,
be like, wow, I do not feel good doing all of these things at all.
yeah. Yeah. And hats off to you if you can force yourself to power through it, because I can't, and I haven't for years. Like I said, that's how I discovered my menstrual cycle and its impact on me, because I just couldn't do it.
Women, a lot of women will see that they can do it for a little bit, and
Yeah.
then they're like, I don't know what happened. Like this worked
Yeah.
so good, and now all of a sudden my hair is falling out, or I feel like garbage, or I developed these issues, because eventually it kind of like catches up.
Yeah, I noticed it with my morning runs, like in my 30s, right? Where I would like get out there, and the first part of my cycle be like running and have all the energy, and then just like drop off and just beat myself up for it, really. Like really, I carried so much guilt and anger at myself for not being that same person that did her morning runs and had her green juice and like could take care of myself in that way in the second part of my cycle. But once I kind of understood what was going on and aligned with it, I got it like, oh yeah, this might be a better time for me to do yoga. Or even now, like I've had to let go of some stuff around like meditation. And like I love pulling, like as a meditation, like pulling a tarot card in the morning, looking up its meaning and journaling about what that means for me and my businesses, this kind of thing, right? I
Yeah.
do not do that in the first part of my cycle. Like I don't need it. And then in that second part, I kind of come home to that kind of behavior.
I love that. And like that actually brings up a really good point, which is like for a lot of us, routines and rituals are really important. But I think as women, we also need to do a little unlearning and understand that like actually hormonally, we just might need slightly different routines and rituals at different points in our cycle. Like you can repeat them month after month, but you may need something different in the first half of your cycle than the second. And being able to honor that, and also not force yourself to, I'm going to spend an hour doing these routines that I do not want to do right now, but I'm going to do them because this is what's going to make me successful. Giving ourselves that permission to be a little more flexible with things,
Yeah.
I actually will kind of move the needle much further forward for a lot of us.
Yeah, I call it like a return to our cyclical nature. And what's
Yeah.
true is that the first part of the cycle is it's more masculine oriented in some ways. It's the outward part. And it's more aligned with our society, with modern societies and how we're expected to be and how men are. And that second part it's a very different experience. And then you layer age onto that, and very different experience. Where that second part of the cycle tends to take over your life in all parts of your cycle.
Yeah, that is such a good way to look at it. And I think that would just be, it would be so cool if more women like understood like, oh, this second half of my cycle where I'm really supposed to look a little bit more inwards. This is actually okay to do this. And it's really good for me to do this. Like, I don't always have to be in that masculine energy. I mean, the complexities around why as women we do that is, we could have a whole other episode just about that.
Yeah.
Also like letting ourselves almost feel vulnerable enough to step into that more feminine, like inward based energy and see what comes out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because we talk about the inward and the feminine. I also noticed though in that in my luteal phase, I become yes more inward, but simultaneously much more authoritative about the things in my life. Like boom, 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 decision making, and like I don't take any crap from anyone. And I'm not like questioning and needing coaching and needing guidance. Like I just step into myself in a different way, which is pretty liberating.
Yeah, it's the get shit done phase for
Yeah.
sure. Right? Like, you really just like be very productive in that time. And right, like as we move into menstruation, like women are especially intuitive then. So like it is the
Yeah.
great time to do some gut checks and be like, what do I need? What do I not need? And let me follow through on that.
Yeah, I love that. Now, so is your whole way that you work with women, is it mapped onto the menstrual cycle? Like, is this your thing? Because, like I said, I talk to so many people and this is a part of their thing, but this seems to be pretty central to your thing.
It is. So in my business, I primarily work with a lot of female entrepreneurs, business owners, executives, women who they are working on projects while just, living their life, being moms, doing whatever else it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
So part of what I do with their health, whether they're coming to me with gut issues or anxiety or whatever it may be, is we really look at the big picture. And I think just as we would look at heart rate or any other vital sign, like your menstrual cycle is a vital sign, right? So it's
Yeah.
so important to me to be able to help them look at that, not just from like, are you having PMS or not, but from what are we doing every day to support optimal health in
Hmm.
alignment with your hormones? How are you structuring your work? How are you doing self-care? Like, to me, self-care is understanding what's happening with your body, with your hormones, and acting accordingly to support that versus just doing, the bubble bath thing. Like, I love a bubble
Yeah.
bath, don't get me wrong, but I think self-care has been a little misplaced on that sometimes.
Yeah.
So, as we work through this kind of integrative approach to whatever the health issue may be, one that always includes nutrition and fitness and brain health and hormonal health, like, you have to consider the menstrual cycle during that, or the lack thereof. If I'm working with a woman who's postmenopausal, like, we need to know what her physiology is doing, because that's dictating pretty much everything else, right?
Yeah.
um so to ignore it, and I think is just kind of doing women a disservice. So I bring it into everything we do, and we're always talking about, even with a supplement plan, like, okay, again, if our bodies are changing, like, should we be on the same supplement day in and day out? Like, probably not, actually.
Yeah.
It's one thing if we're talking like a digestive enzyme, but if we're talking things that influence hormones and brain neurochemistry, like, we may need to map those to a woman's cycle as well to get the best benefits.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very, very interesting. So, if I'm understanding it right, the way that you're working with women is like every aspect of their health journey, mapping that onto the different phases of their cycle to optimizing it, if you will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that accomplishes a couple things. Like, first, it obviously helps them get rid of their symptoms, but more importantly, it's very empowering to understand what's happening in your body and kind of knowing, like, what do I have going on in my life the next 2 weeks? This is where I'm at hormonally. So now I can plan for it. Now I know what I need. I know what I can handle or not handle. I know what my brain strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah.
It just kind of helps with tying everything together a little bit more, because I hear from a lot of women, they're like, I just want better work-life balance. And I actually don't think that's true. I think they want better alignment with those two things so that they're not burning themselves out and then like collapsing on the couch because they're
Yep.
exhausted. Like, that's not really balance. Like, I think what they're looking for is, how do I make my days flow easier so that I don't have to escape from my working life and I can like do the things I love.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that whole thing of how do I make my days flow easier, which everyone's asking themselves. How do I better myself? And I agree with you in that I always say menstrual cycle awareness is the greatest form of self-care, because how you do that and how you accomplish it changes. Damn it, it changes. Like, that's the thing. How you accomplish that changes from each part of your cycle.
It changes through each part of our cycle, and it changes in each part of our lifespan as women. Like I work with a lot
Yes.
of women in their 30s and 40s, and like it's also a different ball game in those 2 decades. And like I think I feel for people in like my mom's generation who kind of just like
Mm,
got told, oh, this is menopause, this is your life now. And like they weren't really able, like no one educated them or prepared them for what was going to be happening.
yeah.
So I love seeing now like so many women interested in learning more about this and helping guide other women through menstruation to perimenopause to menopause. And like it's not this awful thing. Like we've been taught that our hormones are this scary, awful weakness, and like they're really freaking cool. Like
Yeah.
literally are so amazing if you understand how to leverage them to feel better, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's like building awareness around this and then also preparing these generations for what should be just a smooth transition into the second half of our lives at menopause. Like it shouldn't be this scary ending thing. Oh, my life is over. Like, no, it's just a different phase. Like that phase is cool too, but we got to understand what's happening in our bodies first.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we've gotta understand ourselves at every part of the cycle, right? When it comes to, like, the kind of psycho-spiritual practice of menstrual cycle awareness,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
it's highly individualized, right? Like, I I'm a menstruality mentor, which means, like, I can share with people in programs and clients, whatever, what I do, right? And what works for me, but I can't tell you what's gonna work for you in this part of your cycle. Now your approach with functional medicine and these health, uh, I don't know what to call them, hacks or ways or whatever, is it individualized to the woman, or are there like general, like wide sweeping general things that correspond to each part of the cycle, or both?
There may be some general trends. Also like assuming that, first and foremost, I'm also a firm believer in like everybody trying to do a little bit of lab work at least once to understand their baseline.
Yeah.
By that, I mean, like, I actually love doing either like a 28-day hormone test where we kind of map their cycle, especially if it's irregular, or doing a little bit of combination of blood work and at-home testing just to figure out where you're starting.
Mhm.
Because while there are trends, those trends also depend on it being a fairly regular cycle. And the reality is a lot of
Yeah.
women do have fluctuating hormones. There's other things going on, especially the last couple of years. The levels of burnout, stress, and how that's impacted hormones are definitely present. So I think first and foremost, we got to look at the big picture of a woman's hormones, meaning what's going on with her sex hormones, with cortisol, with insulin in her blood sugar, with her thyroid. Like they can't work independently. They're all working together. So you gotta figure out all of them, what's going on. And that's not something that you have to test constantly, but I'm a big proponent of doing like a once a year check on those.
Mhm.
Um, for myself as well. I just want to see how things are changing. So that tells us like, okay, the trends that we do know are there, like, can we jump right into those, or do we have some repair work to do first? But generally, some of the trends we've talked about are where I'm going. Things like knowing what that nervous system quality is when we can better handle stress. We know that there's better times for like doing any sorts of therapeutic nutrition diets versus others. By that, I mean, like, for example, all of women coming to me with blood sugar issues who are interested in trying like a keto diet to fix that.
Mhm.
We also map that to the menstrual cycle. And like, we understand that that may not be ideal in the second half of her cycle, and kind of try and play around with it more in the first. So there are some trends with what women are more prone to benefit from in terms of nutrition, in terms of
Yeah.
fitness, in terms of lifestyle stuff, but it still has to be personalized, because also like not everyone has a 28-day cycle. Like some women have had 26-day cycles their entire life, or
Yeah.
32-day cycles their entire life. It doesn't mean that their cycles are incorrect. That's just what's normal for them. So we have to kind of,
Absolutely.
we got to think about that. And then also look at each woman's, like, what does her stress bucket look like? Because that's also going to be an important determinant in how we map all of these things. Like,
Mm.
we have a pretty low underlying stress level, or is this someone who's got a couple little kids at home? She's not sleeping. She has a demanding job. she's in the middle of the move, she's in a home environment where there's some like environmental toxins, like
Yeah.
that woman's approach and what we're going to do is going to be way different than a person who doesn't have that kind of stress load coming in.
I love it that you honor that and make space for that. I do know that you've talked about, I think on your, maybe on your Instagram is where I saw this, like the female brain of like a busy, successful woman and what that looks like. So that resonates with me. I'd love to hear from you about like what your
It's a complicated place.
yes.
Yeah, I always say this to my clients, which is like, I love the brain. I feel like until recently, it's like the forgotten organ. Like everyone wants to talk about the adrenals and the thyroid, but like our brain dictates all of that stuff. Like you have these little glands in there, the pituitary, the hypothalamus, that still have an impact on all of those hormone systems. And the brain, like much like the gut, it can be very sensitive to inflammation, to environmental stressors, to toxins, and like it's really hard to follow through on a plan and stay focused when your brain is inflamed and on fire, right? Like we gotta brain health into it a little bit more. But also in terms of tying this back to the menstrual cycle, the brain is really interesting. It actually has a ton of like estrogen receptors on there. So much as our estrogen is fluctuating, like that means there's different levels of estrogen impacting the brain at a given part in our cycle, which is why we have different cognitive strengths throughout our menstrual cycle. And most of us intuitively can feel this, like when we think about it, especially if you are someone who's running a business, you're an entrepreneur, you're in the executive world, like that first half of your cycle, like you're naturally wired and your brain is performing for you to show up in a leadership role. You're really good at planning, at directing, at creativity, at all of those sorts of things, like great time for team meetings and all of that. Whereas, like I mentioned earlier, in that second half of the phase, it's a little bit more of that get shit done phase, but our brain is really wired to learn and to process information that way. So we can also kind of think about those two strengths. And we see this as well, like a lot of women who are going through menopause will be like, I have menopause brain. They feel that lack of estrogen in their brain more than anyone else times. And then in terms of like the other sex hormone, progesterone, there's some like really fascinating research around the use of progesterone in like concussion treatment. So we know all of these impacts of the hormones on the brain. We just don't always think about them. But again, like for the high performing woman who is also very prone to like mentally beating herself up if she doesn't feel productive, like it can be a game changer to understand when to leverage these different strengths. And it can give you a little bit of leeway to be like, oh, it's not that I'm not being productive this way. It's just I set myself up for the wrong kind of work to leverage my strengths right now. So
I think I'm around cycle day 16 right now. And I had a total trip up, even though like all day long, I talk to people about their menstrual cycles and menstrual cycle awareness and I've been doing this for years. And day 16. So around day 14, I was like, realized things were getting really hard for me in my business planning, and I was like trying to force it, right? I was trying to keep going and getting angry at myself that I couldn't keep going. And then I was like, oh shit, I've gone into another phase of my cycle and I'm not making room for that. And I'm trying to be how I was last week. And that is not going to work. Like that's not going to serve me right now. And even just that switch, that understanding was there was such relief in that for me, and then I was able really to shift into a different mode.
Absolutely. Or like something I'll talk to a lot of my entrepreneurs about is like, try not to make major life altering business decisions around day like 26 or 27 of your cycle. Like literally when all that brain chemistry drops out, when your hormones drop out, like it can feel like nothing is working, the world is ending. And like literally 2 days later, you're going to be like, oh, that's what that was. Everything's fine. So it's also that awareness so that you don't like put yourself through this mental anguish every month of being like, nothing's working. It just feels that way, but it actually is okay. But again, like you said, it's that awareness of just, oh, okay, it's going to be okay. This is my brain and all of those happy brain chemicals leaving my body for a day or two. So I just need to step back and take care of me and circle back to this in a couple of days.
Yeah. I do not allow myself, I have a rule, I'm not allowed to buy any coaching for myself in the first part of my cycle, because if I every time I get so mad at myself because I'll hit, ovulation and beyond, and then I can just do everything that I was really like over planning and therefore feeling like I needed guidance and hand holding in the first part of my cycle. And yeah, like, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait a week and see where I'm at and then see if I still need it. And I would say like 95% of the time I don't. And so therefore the coaching that I do, because I'm a big believer in coaching and buying these like, professional guidance tools that we need, the stuff I buy, I know that I really need it, because I've waited and I've gone into this part of my cycle where I can just do all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also the value of having like mentors and coaches who, I mean, I have coaches still,
Yeah.
who also understand what's happening at this menstrual cycle, um,
Yeah.
month, because then they can also understand like what you need. Like, okay, this
Yeah.
is what the person needs for these 2 weeks, and then we're transitioning because I know this is what they're going to need the next 2 weeks.
I
Like,
love that.
they just need to help keep you like grounded and on task in the first half because your brain has all these creative ideas, or they may need to remind you like, hey, tap into this. Like, you're very social, you're in a leadership role right now. Like, go
Yeah.
out and create those collaborations, do the Instagram lives. Whereas in the second phase, their job may be more like, let's get this done. Let's follow the plans we set. Let's create the content map that we laid out and dreamed up earlier in the phase. So I think there's like a really beautiful alignment when coaches and mentors, even not necessarily even health coaches, but as soon as they understand this, they can better
Yeah.
support their clients too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very powerful idea. So let's see here. I'm curious how you came to this work. Like, not necessarily your professional journey to it, but like your personal journey, your relationship with your cycle and what led you yeah, to doing this work and to working in this way, like doctor turned coach and so focused on the menstrual cycle. So please tell me if you could tell us a little bit about your cycle and your kind of personal journey to this.
Sure. I have a couple of doctor friends who have all transitioned to this coaching world. And we were actually talking about this over the weekend because it feels like a little weird at first. And then you're like, wow, no, this is actually fantastic. Like, this is so much more fulfilling than, just treating people's lab results and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
really, like so many healthcare practitioners, of course, like my journey started with my own health issues. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease when I was 21 in college, which is an autoimmune thyroid issue. And that was really the first time that like I actually met a functional medicine practitioner during that who helped bring my awareness to just how interconnected the body really was. Like, I thought I was doing everything right in college. I'd gone to Cornell University actually thinking I wanted to go into cancer research. Got a job in a research lab, wasn't for me, but
Yeah.
I thought I was doing everything right. I was on the treadmill for an hour every night. I was, eating the Mediterranean diet, like all these things that were okay, but they were not okay for me.
Yeah.
And actually at that time, I had been put on birth control for skin issues, for acne. And no
Mm.
one ever told me, like, when that happened when I was 19, that it might be my diet contributing to it, or it might be my insane stress levels, or all these other things. It was just like, oh, it's your hormones, here you go. I'm like, yeah, it fixed the acne, but it also like set me up for a little bit of a health crisis after the fact.
Yeah.
Thankfully, when I started learning all this stuff, I went off birth control after being on it for 4 years and dived into my skin issues, which, as it turned out, were coming from a whole lot of gut issues, a whole lot of other things, eating foods that were not right for me. But it also took my menstrual cycle a while to re-regulate. I started having a regular cycle probably within like 8 months of going off the pill, but it was not normal. I definitely like was not functional the week leading up to my period, like
Mm.
anxiety, irritability, cramps, the whole shebang, like all those things that people are like, oh, that's just normal. And I was like, I don't want to waste a week of my month every month. Like, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
not going to settle for this. So I started looking into more and more like what I could be doing to help with some of that. And it started more basic things like trying out different nutritional approaches. I definitely noticed as I fixed up like my gut health and supported my detox pathways that a lot of that went away.
Mhm.
To the point where I started feeling okay again, but it's also my nature as someone who is a high achiever to be like, all right, well, I feel okay, but like now I want to feel really good all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want more. Um, so I actually, in my late 20s, I started having some issues with my cycle again, this time due more to like stress. I was working
Mm.
like 80 hours a week in a clinic. I was in a real stressful relationship at the time that I was like so much in autopilot that I was not even evaluating the relationships around me well enough to be aware of that. And I also like, I think I became obsessed with being healthy and as a way of having something to control to the point where like my body fat dropped so low that I stopped having a period. And that was like a very big wake up call for me. Like, whoa, this is not good. Like something must be going on. Like I'm not trying to compete in bodybuilding or something, but clearly my body is sending up like an SOS flag. So that started like this whole other level of awareness of the impact of stress on my cycle. Like, okay, I know now gut health and diet and all of that, but now like mental stress can actually impact that. This is really interesting. And that ideal weight and look that I was after, like that might not be the ideal weight and look for my body and what it needs to be really
Yeah.
healthy. And around that same time, I decided to start my own business, which was a whole other layer of stress, but also meant that I had now to design my own workday, which can always go one of two directions. Like as an entrepreneur, you can work literally all the time. There's always going to be work to do. It is never going to end.
Hmm.
Or you start to be like, all right, well, I did this because I wanted a certain type of freedom. So let
Yeah.
me give myself that. And for
Yeah.
me, that came not just from scheduling things out, but also understanding like, let's go back to like, what does my body really need? Like, I'm clearly still stressing it out, even if it is in the name of health. Like, I
Yeah.
think thing that a lot of ambitious women do, we almost become a little too obsessed with health to the point where it becomes unhealthy.
Mhm.
And that takes a lot of like mental work to go through. But, once you start to understand, like, all right, I can go through these cycles of pushing my body, pushing those stress systems to improve my resilience, and then nourishing it and making sure I'm taking care of me and coming back inward. So just kind of like self-experimentation with that is really what led me to understand how powerful it was. And seeing the results it had on just like my own business and quality of life was, wow, okay, actually some days in my cycle, I do much better if I'm only working like 4 hours of the day and I'm really taking care of me and I'm just as productive in those 4 hours as I am in 8 hours on another day.
Yeah.
It's leveraging all of those different strengths. And of course, like talking to as many people in that field as possible, pouring through research and figuring out like, well, how do I experiment with this and run some, well, I think it's fun, little N of one experiments on myself. Like I
Mhm.
really want women to understand, like when you experiment with these health tools, like it doesn't have to be a stressor. Like you don't always need the perfect protocol or plan to follow.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really fun to just try things for a while and see how you feel.
Yeah. Where was I mean, I hear your story. Where was the jump for you? Where was that aha moment of it's the cycle, right? It's the cycle that's making me different.
Yeah, in terms of like how I felt and things
Yeah,
like that.
in your journey, like in your understanding of it. And I'm insisting on this question with you just because you're one of the only other people I've ever spoken to that's that like committed to mapping wellness, in your case, medical wellness to and like health wellness to the menstrual cycle, like I'm super committed to that. And again, like I had it was like an aha moment, like a one-off, like, oh my God, it's my cycle. Maybe because of your medicine training, it didn't happen like that for you. But I'm just wondering when that, like how the cycle got so in there for you.
Yeah, and you're right to an extent, like having a medical background, you do understand the importance of hormones and all of that. But also for me, I really think it was just the last couple of years, like that year, 2019 leading into 2020, like I was here in Arizona trying to build a new business. And then with COVID hit and all the stress that came with that, like gave me a lot of reflection time. Like I think it did for a lot of us, where you really you really dive deep into so many things. And like for me, I was reading some books that were more on like personal development. Like one of them was called like Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Tayeb. Another one was like Nicole LePera's book, How to Do the Work. And I was like
Mhm.
diving into personal development work. And I was kind of just like, holy shit, even this can be mapped to your menstrual cycle. Like
Yeah.
I am more prone to benefit from doing this kind of work at this stage. And I think some of
Yeah.
it was just like literally having the time and space to make those connections because I was no longer in autopilot, right? Like
Yeah.
I had time, like so much time. And to me, it was just like, I can picture where I was reading that book, but
Yeah.
it kind of understanding like, oh, this is what everything can be for women. And then, kind of diving into this world of working with these female entrepreneurs and stuff. Like I've always been good at watching patterns and I would see it in all of them. I would see
Yeah.
times where they were just like crushing it and they knew they were crushing it. And there were times they were crushing it and they felt like they were failing horribly. And the connection was always where they were at in their cycle. And like from the
Yeah.
outside looking in, you could very easily see that, but it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. Like it's really hard to self-analyze that sometimes. So having someone kind of like pluck you out and be like, you're still rocking it.
Yeah.
You don't see it that way right now. So let's bring a little awareness to this so that you know for next time, so that we don't beat ourselves up about this month after month.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Same. I remember exactly not like where I was in that moment, but where I was in my life when this became so clear for me. And it was reading books about habits. It was like really trying to hack myself, right? Like I'm going to
Mhm.
hack my life. I'm going to make my life better. And then like the rigidness with which I went at that. And then, but because I was paying so much attention, I finally saw the cycle, the cycle, the cycle, right? On many different levels. I saw the cycle I was in, I saw the cycle I had, everything was a cycle suddenly. And yeah, I remember like my ex-business partner at the time was like, "Oh yeah, totally. I get like one good week from you a month. One good work week," you know? And I'm like, "What? What are you
When
talking
somebody says
about?"
that to you, you're like, oh my gosh, that's all I have, like one good week out of them. Like, I do not want to settle for that. Like, I clearly have to do
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, that's the thing too, right? Like that statement was like funny. I laughed it off, but it shook me a little bit like shit. And then like evaluating like she's not wrong, right? And then the long game of building the alignment and the other parts of my cycle, like understanding it well enough to know what to do when, right? And what I was good at when.
Yeah, you said something before, like you were trying to like hack your way to like
Yeah.
optimal health. And I had a really interesting conversation with a business partner and friend of mine recently, where it's like, even as women, sometimes it's the language with how we talk to ourselves. And I found when I was doing that a lot, like, how can I hack this, do that? I ended up very stuck in that like intense masculine energy
Yeah.
to the point where I did do everything wrong. I literally like overdid all of it to the point where I didn't feel good and my hair was falling out. And like I
Mhm.
had to really step back and be like, maybe it's also just the way I'm reframing these tools. And like, I'm not trying to hack or cut away things. Like, I think as women, we've experienced that too much in our lives, like chopping away pieces of who we are, trying to be better.
Mm.
How do we reframe this? So with my clients, we actually call it bio elevation. We're not trying to hack anything away. We're just
Oh, I love
elevating.
that.
We're elevating your biology, because like that's the point of biohacking, right? It's feeling like bringing that performance on a cellular level to the next level. Like it's already within you. You don't need to cut away at yourself for it. You just need to elevate it and bring it out. And even that little language shift for me was
Yeah.
very powerful, because I stopped approaching things as in, what do I need to cut out to feel better? It's more,
Yeah.
I need to bring this to the surface to feel more alive. And sometimes that does mean slowing down. Sometimes that does mean doing the contrast therapies, the fasting. Other times it means like looking internally and being like, what do I need? Like, how do I feel right now? Like, what am I primed to do right now? It's actually okay if I don't go do that super intense CrossFit class today. What I really need is to slowly lift some weights and do some yoga, and that is fine.
Yeah.
It's like always doing the intense, crazy things.
Yeah, I love that you guys came with that bio elevating. That's very Very powerful, and it resonates a lot. So that's very cool. Thank you for that term. I love that. So okay, let's just for anyone that's listening that wants to join you, you have a community membership, Power 45. Can you tell us about that and why it's called Power 45?
Yeah. So I kept the last couple of years, I kept talking to women who were just like, they were so tired of doing different programs and protocols and diets. They're like, if I do one more gut reset or one more liver cleanse, like I'm going to lose my mind. And like, clearly, if you have to keep redoing that, like you haven't found a sustainable lifestyle that just supports you.
Yeah.
So I basically took my signature coaching program, which is built more on a health and high performance foundation. So we move through the major pillars of women's health and high performance, starting with like mindset and then going into sleep and gut health and hormones and stress management and biohacking and longevity and all of that. But we do it over the course of 45 days in 15 minutes or less per day. And it's built on the premise of habit stacking, again, all from this place of alignment with your cycle. So inside the membership, you have access to the 45-day program. There's also like weekly office hours with me to ask questions and help customize it. We have guest experts come in from all different health backgrounds to talk about different health topics, to take deeper dives. There's like bonus courses on things like cycle syncing and different biohacking protocols for women based on this cycle. So it's meant to be this hub that you can come into to learn more about all of these things and have the support while you implement it. And the beauty of the Power 45 program is that it's not a diet. There actually is no nutrition plan required of you. It's based on doing the 80% of the work that a lot of women know they need to do, but aren't doing.
Yeah.
Things like actually making a sleep routine and understanding the benefits of it. Things like actually going outside in the morning and getting that low level light exposure that people know they should do, but don't do. But now you have a group of women who are doing it with you. You have accountability and support so that at the end of 45 days, like you have those foundations in place. And then you have ongoing tools to help you really like fine tune it and dive a little bit deeper to do those kind of N of one experiments with yourself. Like, oh, now I'm going to do cycle syncing with my work, right? Now I'm going to try intermittent fasting. And like you have the ability to go learn how to do those and be able to ask functional practitioners about it along the way.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I love that. I will definitely put a link to your program, website, social medias, all that in the show notes. So for anyone listening, you can go there and you can check it out. So thank you so much for being here today and for this conversation. It's been wonderful.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. I feel like we could have talked all day about this.
Yeah. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.